This is Theology Bits, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. I'm Pastor Ben. This week, in this video, we start a new series called Who is Christ for Us Today? A question asked by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and this will be the first section, the introduction. So just a few things before we enter into our topic of biography. I'm assuming most of you watching this know something about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I will just provide just the most basic biography. There is incredibly wonderful resources on Bonhoeffer's biography. Unfortunately, there's also some rather misleading information out there, so I'm just going to give you the basics here. First is Bonhoeffer lives 1906 to 1945. Died age 39. He was a pastor, professor, theologian, and was, if you figure out his dates here, a German pastor and theologian during the time of National Socialism. And in that time, he was a part of the Confessing Church. He taught and actually organized the seminary at Finkenwalde, the Confessing Church's seminary, which was the church that did not go along with, it's a little more complicated than this, but was the church that did not follow Hitler's Reich Church, or this goal to make one church out of the many different denominations of Lutherans that there were in Germany at the time. Most people know about the second half of his life, less about his theology, and more that he joined, in order to actually avoid being drafted, he joined the Abwehr, which was a kind of secret police that existed before the Nazis, and he was part of that group, and as part of that group, got involved into the plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. The plot, of course, failed, and he and many of the conspirators was arrested in 1943 and then executed by the Nazis in 1945. And there's a lot more going on with his story than that, very worth finding out more. There's a film that just came out that I unfortunately cannot recommend, but there have been many different things, including some wonderful documentaries out on Dietrich Bonhoeffer that you could check out. But the reason I don't want to focus on that is because I think so much has been focused on his life and his story, and it's more complicated. It's not quite as compelling as it automatically sounds, but it is a very compelling story, that we sometimes forget his very robust theology. And that's what this series is going to be about. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's theology, and a very specific aspect of his theology, stemming from actually one of the very last thing he wrote. In 1944, he writes a letter from prison to his friend Eberhard Bethge. And in that letter, he asks, "Who is Jesus Christ for us today?" He writes this now over 80 years ago, and it is an incredibly resonant and important question, and the way he frames it is very apropos of our own world. That is, he starts in this same letter famously by saying, "We have entered into a time of religionless Christianity." And he means something by this that is actually different than what most people say. Sometimes you hear about there's religion rather than relationship or something. That's not what he means. What he means is that the church as a whole has for most of its existence expected that the way people are religious, the way people express their religiosity, is somehow essential to what it means to be human. Meaning that corporate worship, corporate membership in the spiritual is something that people are just going to do, and that the only question is how or which one. He says this has been the assumption for most of the church's history, that there is an inherent a priori religiosity just in everybody. So the church's job was just to channel that into a meaningful manner. And what he says is already now, in the 1940s, we can see that's not true. That there are plenty of people who have no interest in religiosity one way or the other. That's different than adamant opposition. It's simply not having interest. That religiosity is just not part of their world. And so, if that's true, then what's left? Who is Jesus Christ for us today? Is there a way of being Christian without the formal structures that have always been there for what it meant to be church? And so he says, for example, that when Paul writes, the big question, especially in Galatians and Romans, was, do you have to be circumcised to be justified? Meaning, do you have to be either Jewish or proselyte Jew in order to be made right before God? That was Paul's question, and it is Paul's question, a big question about Jews and Gentiles in the first century. He says, our question, this is Bonhoeffer, saying our question today for us, rather than for Paul, is there, do you need classical religion in order to have salvation? See, it's a similar type question, and Paul's answer, of course, is you absolutely do not have to be circumcised. Bonhoeffer's answer is you don't need that classical style of religion. But what questions does it bring up? And what does that mean for us? Well, he's not going to answer all of that in this one letter, but he gives us a couple of clues. The first thing he says is one major error of Christianity today, and that it has always been, is that it has been a religion at the boundaries or at the margins. And what he means by that is not the margins of humanity or something, but the margins of what we have, of our own ability, what we're able to do. Meaning, where is it that we look for our religion where we don't have any power to control anything? At the places of where we are in anxiety because it's bigger than ourselves, we're in fear because we can't control what's going on, we have a lack of power of our situation. It says there is where most people look for their religiosity, with the biggest one being, of course, death. Here I need religion because I can't control it myself. He says the problem with that is, what have you done? You have created religiosity that is not part of the primary aspects of your life. This is the very end of your life. What we need is a move to the center. And the center is, where is it that I actually live right now? Where's my life right now? Not what we don't understand, but what we do understand. So he makes just one comment that we have fundamentally misunderstood what resurrection is. If resurrection is only the antidote for death, solving this problem of death, then it's only at the margins. It's only that which happens beyond what we could possibly understand. But what would it mean if resurrection meant something for our life right now? See, this is what he's hinting at, is what is that center of who Jesus Christ is for us today? This is a question not of what is the symbol of Christ in the world, but how is this experienced in the present? These next several videos that we will have will be addressing this question. Here, in this essay, Bonhoeffer asks the question that if you look carefully at his writings, he had been struggling with throughout his entire career. Where is it that we really find Christ and Christ among us experienced in a real way? This is the first video. More will be to come. Please follow along. This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.